And this is all coming to a point where Trump puts out a Truth Social post saying the reset, right? Get ready, the biggest reset the world's ever seen. Your thoughts, SG?
Well, I think my thoughts are, how many times before it's mathematically impossible? We've seen President Trump making overtures to resets and rebalancings and revaluations and getting the manipulation out of the currency markets and cleaning up the finance markets and getting the debt leverage against the American citizens down per household, per capita for the whole GDP. The man's been talking about it forever. He just hasn't been using the overt language that we've now seen. But we've sort of known that all of this is coming, right? When we look back at the meeting between him and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in September of 2018, I believe it was shortly before, if I'm not mistaken, the executive order 13848 that targeted foreign interference in a United States election. And at that press conference, he told the entirety of the world, we are going to level the playing field with respect to currency itself, with respect to how money itself is valued monetarily as well as fiscally. There's slight differences between the two, but the differences are important. And monetary is a reflection of the intrinsic value of the object, whatever that object that's being used to trade is worth. And there has to be a standardized agreement, at least on the measurement of how that value is calculated, or you can't have a system that operates on all of the same levers, right? You've got some systems operating on squares and other systems are operating on circles. And that's what we have going on around the world right now. And so he's been talking about this issue at least since that meeting. Really before that, when you look at the man's rhetoric about all the stuff that Obama did and the tweets that have surfaced from the 2009 to 2016 timeframe from President Trump, he's been talking about Iran and how Iran received a ton of cash from the Obama administration. Where do we think that cash went? Well, it went to the closed financial apparatus that existed between private Russian oligarchs, Tehran, and individuals that were tied to the North Korean military in North Korea. And so if you're trying to drain that dark money pool, if you're trying to set things right again, what do you have to do? Well, you have to eliminate at least one part of the triad. In this case, I think the part that was chosen was clearly Iran. And then you have to have the ability to shape the world markets in such a fashion that a standardized measurement of value, as well as a redefinition of trade locally from this international importation to more local and regional stuff, you have to do all of that in order to arrive at something called a reset. Well, that's exactly the process we've been witnessing, Nino, not just since Iran, but since Venezuela, the very first part of this year. Venezuela was a hedge, a security blanket, a buffer for the things that are going on right now. It also allowed us to redefine the entirety of Western Hemispheric trade routes. We're going after the Panama Canal next to ensure that that trade route is secured for this particular hemisphere. And that forces the rest of the world, specifically the black market criminal crime syndicate that exists out there, but also the rest of the legal trade and lawful trade and commerce that occurs. But it forces all of it to redefine how it's going to move itself moving forward. In other words, it's a complete redefinition, a complete reshaping of how these countries interact with one another, both regionally, internationally, and regionally, from a sense of like immediately locality, like the Far East Asian sphere versus the African sphere versus the Gulf states. And on top of all of that, Nino, you can't have a reset until you pull the thumbs off all of the various scales that exist around the world with respect to resource control. And where does a lot of that exist? It exists in Africa, it exists in South America, and it exists in the Arab Middle East and the various Eurasian steppes, and a little bit over into the South and Southeast Asian corridors. And when you look at the history of the intelligence community implantation and infiltration of itself over the last 75 years, every single one of those areas was a hotbed for that focalized effort, for those nodes of control that were beyond U.S. jurisdiction, but functioned within the constructs of the previous international law. This is the world's most powerful reset because it's resetting money, it's resetting trade, it's resetting resource management, it's resetting nation-state relations with one another, it's resetting cultural inhibitions inside of nation-states that have been terrorized by their own governments, most of which were propped up by the CIA over the last 75 years. It could not be a more exciting time to watch these things play out.
So I was given, a window of time of when a lot of these operations must be completed. And I'm sure you know that as well. I know we'll talk about that more on Nino's Corner.tv after this program, folks. We're going to go to .tv and talk about the reset specifically and talk about the EBS and how to prepare and go into that. You want to do that, right, SG?
That would be fine with me.
So, one of the things that I'm looking at here is Turkey, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I feel like this is one of the things that needs to be wrapped up before the reset, the plug gets pulled. And when I talk about the plug being pulled, folks, I'm talking about, yes, it is as extreme as what you're hearing. 10 days of darkness, cell phones don't work, nothing works. It's 10 days. For a lot of people, this is going to be living hell if they're not preparing. You're hearing the same thing, correct, SG?
I am, and the window of time that I've been told, I'll just get it out for your audience out there, is anywhere over the next 6 to 9, a maximum of 6 to 12 months when we look at this
That's
process
exactly what I was told.
Out.
It's exactly what I was told.
And when you look at what has to happen, it makes a lot of sense that we would be in those in-game sort of Revelation style, points in the story.
Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Are we talking to like you? You're dialed in, aren't you, brother? I mean, that's exactly the two numbers: 6 and 9, 9 months. Wow.
Well, and again, when we look at the pace of events, we can sort of gauge the immediate future to a degree, not prognostication with any sort of like clairvoyance, but just an educated hypothesis about what is to come and the pace of it coming by looking at the pace of things over the last, say, 12 months and trying to find points of acceleration. How many points did we accelerate? How far did we come? What are the things that transpired? And when we examine that, we can clearly see that after Trump hit office again in 2025, this became full throttle, and not just for making America great or healthy again or making America an industrial power again. All of those things come throughout the process, but we're full throttle to completely eviscerate and eradicate the Luciferian central banking cabal's control worldwide. And so we have to keep in mind, we're fighting this sort of cultural war at the nation state level. Yes, we're dealing with our own cultures. We're dealing with agreements or disagreements with one another. All of those things are happening. But the real war is in the supranational space, where you have transnational interests and entities that have controlled huge swaths of the planet, primarily from the background. And that control has acted as a lever for them to sort of shift the entire balance of geopolitics however they needed it to be shifted. And that war did not stop under Joe Biden. It actually accelerated under Joe Biden. Then it accelerated again under President Trump over this last year. I guess we're coming into like 14 months at this point, 15 months. And so looking over the next 6 to 12, based on everything that has happened in the last 14 to 15 months, we can say that the death of NATO is on the table. We can say that a nuclear armament scare event of some kind is now officially on the table, because we've been escalating in those directions. The rhetoric, as well as the kinetic geopolitical behavior, now sort of supports that inevitability. We have that now coming from Moscow. We've got that coming from Pakistan. We've got that coming from India, all of them voicing concerns about things going nuclear. We know that the situation between Turkey and Israel, I've been telling people for 3 years that it's going to be the Ottoman Turks that really completely rebalance the power dynamic in the Middle East. Ancient Persia was one of these major things that had to happen. We had to clean out the infestation and intelligence community damage that's been done there and start the healing process. We're just now in the very early days of that. We're talking like, a day and a half old infant with respect to the timeline with that. But the Turks are a pretty strong nationality and culture and have maintained a lot of that cohesiveness and vigor with one another in a way that the Iranians just haven't been able to do. Their cultures are different. They've been different for thousands of years. It's just how they think. And when we clean out the intelligence infestation inside of Ankara, of which I'm not so certain that Erdogan may not be a factional part of, he's sort of a gray hat actor to me in a lot of ways. But when that clean out process begins, you're going to see a much broader conflict in the Middle East, and it will be the knife which cuts the throat of NATO. NATO will not participate in this conflict, and I do not believe the United States will participate in any sort of Article 5 invocation if an attack from Israel on Turkey happens. And we know that they're sort of saber rattling in that direction and have been for a couple of years now. And when you look at the disagreements about territorial control over components of the Syrian desert, especially post-Syrian civil war, and you look at the inflammability, if you will, the ignition point being so low with a lot of that in that area, I think that we could see that happening anytime in the coming weeks or months. And looking at that and seeing how that plays out would also provide a great deal of perspective, if you will, is maybe the better way to put it, but certainly an evaluation basis on which to judge the relationship between Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C. And at that point, I think you would have a lot of different world leaders, as well as, enormous swaths of population groups across the West, sort of understanding implicitly that this is an unhealthy and abnormal relationship, and something has to change here with this. And so that puts all the pressure again back on Israel, even in a further, more intense way. I think you could see Egypt involved in a conflict like that over control of the Suez Canal, probably spawned off by attacks on them from Iranian proxies or Turkish proxies across the Yemeni countryside, and maybe even in the areas immediately south of Egypt along that Red Sea border towards Ethiopia. So this is an incredible time. It's just an amazing time to be alive. I think the events that are to come are going to reshape how we think about Western politics. I think they're going to reshape how we understand the need to be prepared for things, how we understand how to evaluate the information ecosystem with one another. It's certainly going to wake a lot of people up to how the financial control has been comported over the last 100 years. I mean, this is truly, again, it's a terrifying and exhilarating and thrilling all at the same time era to be alive and to witness.
Yeah, we're breaking away from the old guard. This is what it looks like. Trump is a wartime president. He's here to roll up his sleeves, get his hands dirty. None of this is going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. So you better get ready for a bumpy ride, folks. Trump mulls pulling U.S. troops out of NATO countries opposing Iran war. So President Donald Trump is considering moving U.S. troops from North Atlantic Treaty Organization members that have not backed the war against Iran and moving them to more supportive countries. The Wall Street Journal reported Wednesday, while he also mulls trying to withdraw the U.S. altogether from NATO. So this looks like it's coming, folks. And I bet you it comes within the next 6 to 9 months, okay? That's what I'm going to guess. Also, Laura Loomer, an activist close to Donald Trump, reports that an active coup is taking place in the Pentagon with the aim of removing Pete Hegseth, the head of the Defensive Department or Department of War, from his position. All of this is coming out right now, folks. I'm telling you, I guess we could call it now, right, SG? A civil war is erupting within MAGA. It's happening, and it's happening within our government. There's a coup happening now within the Pentagon. This is all coming to a head, and right on time as we come into the Great Reset, right, SG?
Well, I think you're living through the wheat and chaff moment that the good book talks about. And there was always going to have to be an intense shaking of the consciousness tree, if we can use that metaphor, in order to shake out fruit that's dead, leaves that are dead, things that are poisoning the overall tree. And when we look at that, consciousness is everything. It extends to behavior. It extends to politics, finance, business, law, information, opinions, how communications are relayed, who's doing the communicating. All of it is an extension of that Holy Spirit of God and the consciousness that it sustains for all of us here in this world. And so looking at what we see happening inside the Pentagon, I'm not at all surprised. I've been expecting some sort of malevolent event coming from that Pentagon bureaucracy against Hegseth for quite a while now. I think President Trump is actively taking advantage of this intense situation, both nationally and internationally and domestically. And I think President Trump is actually waging multiple psyops. I think some of these psyops are designed on purpose to inflame different segments of the population, because how does one unify groups that can't find any common ground peacefully? You have to give them a common enemy. You have to force them into a situation where they have to evaluate what their opinions are about individuals that they've connected with that they really like. You have to sort of, as you said in your pre-show, force people into deciding and picking a lane. And sometimes that lane is their lane. They have to pick a lane that meets with what they understand to be true. And that lane tends to be the one where all of us feed at that water hole the most wholesomely, is for lack of a better expression of it. We get the best diversity of opinion. We get the best diversity of debate. We get the true meaning of diversity, not that leftist ridiculous stuff that they've been throwing at us for a number of years now. And so I think with all of this, you have the country self-examining. I think you have individuals that are absolutely playing a part in the information ecosystem. One of the ones that you mentioned in your pre-show, is the newest member of what I like to call the Boot Club. And the Boot Club tends to be something that suggests that there's much more behind the scenes, and that certain intense conversations have taken place with entities that maybe don't want to be seen in the light of day. And I'll let your audience take that for how they will. And so looking at that, you can clearly tell that there's some sort of aim here to manipulate the consciousness on purpose. Whether that aim is positive, whether that aim is negative, I think that remains to be seen. But President Trump knows that that's the game that we're all sort of playing with one another. And the man is an absolute genius tactician when it comes to these types of things. When you look at the statements from Iran, for example, or about Iran, you know, an entire civilization, I think was the word, will die tonight, or something like that. I mean, Nino, come on. We all know that the president cannot vaporize 90 million Persians and then maintain any sort of legacy status here in the United States or anywhere around the world after this period of time is over. And he has to think about his 19-year-old son at this point. So looking at that, I think you have genius level psychological warfare being played, and it's scaring all of the right people. It's not just, you know, worrying those surface level thinkers, the onlookers who are going, oh my gosh, how could you say something like that? But it's freaking out the remnants of the deep state opponents that we have, who do have certain footholds inside the information space. They have certain footholds inside the financial space and resource control space. Although interestingly enough, a lot of those physical world footholds have been blown to smithereens just since the Iranian war started a couple of weeks, well, I guess it's been 4 or 5 weeks ago now. So looking at all of this, you know, we're living through a period of time that the entirety of America is sort of splitting at the seams, hungering for some sort of absolution, some sort of, you know, basis from which to draw from, standardized basis, some sort of stability zone, for lack of a better, you know, comparison of it. And that comes through a few different fashions, but one of the fashions it comes through is certainly a reset, which is what President Trump has described. And it also comes through a spiritual maturation, which I think we're also being driven through because of comments like what President Trump made. We have to go and make up our own mind. It's time to think for ourselves.
SG, stay with me. I'm going to read a mid-roll real quick, folks, and I want to talk about Melania Trump, and basically saying, hey, let's listen to the testimonies from the victims. So we're going to get into that next, folks. But first, get your chapter. Alex, if you can run the number up there real quick. Just some real talk for a second, folks. You know me. I love this country. I love God, and I love my family. And when it comes to my family, I don't play around. I've watched people close to me go through the Medicare process, and I'll be honest, it's confusing, it's overwhelming, and it's horrific. And there are a whole lot of brokers out there more interested in their commission than in finding a plan that works for you. That didn't sit well with me, so I went looking for something better, not for clicks, not for sponsorships, but for my family and for you. That's why I partnered with Chapter and recommend them to everyone I know. They actually compare every Medicare plan available. They walk you through it. They walk you through it in plain English, no pressure, no games, just straight answers. And here's what I respect the most: if you're already on the right plan, they'll tell you that's the integrity of this company. On average, they've helped people save about $1,100 a year, and much more than that. If you're willing, if you're 65 or older and already on Medicare, do yourself and your family a favor. Call Chapter now. It's free. It takes about 20 minutes, and you can put real money back in your pocket. There's the number right there, folks, going across the screen, 212-433-2495, 212-433-2495. Folks, it's worth it. Believe me. Believe me. All right, so, you know, Melania Trump denies ties to Jeffrey Epstein, and calls on Congress to hold a hearing for survivors. In a rare public statement, Melania Trump, the First Lady, on Thursday said she never had a relationship with the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein or his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. In her remarks from the White House, she said that there have been numerous fake images and statements about Epstein and me circulating on social media. Her statement was brief, but was notable. The First Lady is cautious in her public remarks and with her public image. A number of her aides gathered to watch her statement in the grand foyer of the White House, but several of them did not know what she was going to say beforehand. It was the first time Melania Trump had spoken out about Epstein's controversy on camera, but her staff has been aggressive at knocking down what they call defamatory Epstein rumors. The First Lady's senior advisor, Mark Beckman, said in a statement that the First Lady decided to speak out now because enough is enough and the lies must stop. It is time for the public and media to focus on her incredible achievements as First Lady, the lives she has positively impacted, and her commitment to our nation, Beckman said. Her remarks came after the Justice Department told the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday that former Attorney General Pam Bondi will not comply with a subpoena to provide testimony next week before the panel. The false smears about me from the mean-spirited and politically motivated individuals and entities looking to cause damage to my good name to gain financially and climb politically must stop, Melania Trump said. So here it comes, SG. More on a lot of people thought this is going to just fade away. It's not fading away. And I think what a perfect and opportune time is now for this stuff to start coming out. What do you say?
I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I have to admit, the statement from Melania Trump, we don't get a lot from FLOTUS. Singularly, she's sort of there with the president a great deal of the time. Remarks.
You cut out, SG. SG, you cut out. All right, well, until he gets going again, folks, these things happen. Technical difficulties. It's all part of the game. Who runs the show? Benjamin Netanyahu rejects President Trump's ceasefire and says the war will continue against Iran at any time he chooses. Netanyahu says he will achieve his objectives through further military action.
Check. 1, 2.
Oh, here we are. All right, so go for it. Go for it.
All right, I apologize about that. But with respect to Melania, I think it's absolutely brilliant. What we've got going on with FLOTUS is attention being drawn back to this issue. This issue is not going away. We've been telling people this for a while. I know that you have been talking about it on your show for at least 4 or 5 years at this point, maybe longer. The Epstein example, and it is an example, is how the corruption has managed to maintain the shadow state control that it has, and how it has gotten infested at every power level. That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about what Epstein teaches us. This entire web was able to entrench itself at all power levels because of the types of activities that it facilitated and the types of parties that it had to bring together at the very top of the pyramid and at the very bottom of the pyramid in order to make this system of control and basically human slavery work. And so looking at that, Melania Trump bringing this forward in a very public fashion while keeping that image pristine and what I think to be mostly unmarred, and willing to go to the mattresses to defend her image, which I think is very important. And it also tends to suggest when someone actually believes that they have the truth on their side versus when they're sort of just bluffing and blustering. But the other thing that it does is it puts the pressure now back on Congress to hold these discussions with individuals that were actually there. And if you read just even a tenth of the files that were released in January of this year with respect to the communications between Epstein and all sorts of power pulpits around the world, from private finance and private fashion and business to academia to government and more, and even in the very high level banking sector, calling himself a very good friend of the Rothschilds, I think was in one of those discussions. When you look at that entire landscape of how that is affected, just imagine what we would hear from the individuals who saw some of it from the inside. And we know that entire process has to play itself out. It has to become a part of public record. It has to be adjudicated in the courts. As much as people want the names and they love the names, I want to go on a non sequitur really quick and come back to this core discussion about what Congress has to do. But we cannot be given all of these names in advance, and the reason for that is because if we want convictions to stick long term, there has to be no route on appeal. And one of the things that gets you an immediate appeal, as long as it goes before an appellate court that's objective with the judiciary, is a constitutional violation that happened in your initial court trial. And if you can prove that that violation affected what's called the integrity of the due process. And so having your name plastered on national media 24 hours a day in the lead up to your trial, you would be able to make the case very easily that no jury in the entirety of the United States is untainted or could have been untainted for your conviction. And so you end up getting out on appeal, most likely in that scenario, and double jeopardy prevents you from being charged for it again. So as much as people want the names and they want to know who did this stuff, those types of things do in fact have to stay redacted until we arrive at the point where broader law enforcement investigations that are being conducted by the book according to the rule of law and being run all of the way to the end of the gate are able to conclude themselves. J.D. Vance has told us just in the last 9 months that there's active investigations going on that the public cannot know about. Actually used the term public cannot know about yet. We know that Tulsi Gabbard and various components of the ONI and the FBI are involved in investigating what happened with the 2020 election and before, going all the way back to Russiagate. We know that Epstein was at least involved in the design of the COVID event that occurred in 2020, and that could be looked at as potential interference from an electoral standpoint. So when you look at how these all tie themselves together, you know, the human trafficking component is just one of the very big pieces of the pie. And that brings me back to Congress and what Congress has to do. We have to hold the record here and air the record out that the United States government knew about human trafficking, knew about what was going on, that the DOJ, FBI, various intelligence agencies and communities all understood what was happening to these people. A lot of times these people were being trafficked to these agencies and these institutions. And so we cannot trust their current form. They must be reformed. They must be transformed in a way that represents actual due process, actual protection of the innocent until proven guilty, the protection of sovereignty in a free and fair society. That's where these discussions go. It's so much more than just who was hanging out with Epstein on an island.
So I'm going to get into this. Who runs the show? Benjamin Netanyahu rejects President Trump's ceasefire and says the war will continue against Iran at any time he chooses. Netanyahu says he will achieve his objectives through further military action under his command. We are ready to resume the fighting at any moment. Our fingers on the trigger. So how do we get rid when this is all done? How are we saving Israel for last? How do you need to prep for the Great Reset? We'll be talking about that and much, much more on ninoscorner.tv. SG, let's cover this on .tv right after this show. Stay with me 1 second. You want to stick around for some What the Fuck news real quick?
Sounds good. God bless all. Good to be here.
All right. Stay with me, SG. Expert warn. Okay, in What the Fuck news, this is crazy. If you all believe this, Artemis 2 craft shuttle is up in space right now. I'm losing faith in humanity. I'm losing faith in humanity. Oh, boy. Listen to this, folks. Expert warns Artemis 2 crew not to fart or they could be in danger. You mean you built this craft to go through the Van Allen radiation belt, go to the moon, but if they fart, the whole thing can blow up. I'm not kidding. I think this is how they troll the public. I think this is really how they troll the public. There's one perhaps unusual problem the crew of NASA's Artemis 2 has to be mindful of while aboard the spacecraft, and that's their farts. In an interview with CTV News science and technology expert Dan Riskin addressed the potential repercussions of a space bathroom of flatulence catastrophe, particularly in light of the fact that Artemis 2's lunar loo temporarily stopped working April 3rd. The crew so they had a sewage backup. But, they're hurling through space. They're going all the way to the moon. They're going to slingshot around the moon, the dark side of the moon, come back to Earth, never having to refuel. Nah, they don't need to refuel. They don't need to. They would have to. Honestly, I think it's been estimated by experts for our 450,000 mile travel to the moon and back. You'd have to refuel like something where between 15 and 20 times. But nah, they don't need to. And they're going to avoid every space rock and meteor along the way, not knowing what's out there, uncharted. Folks, we don't even explore the bottom of the ocean. And you expect me to believe these people are slingshotting around the moon? Give me a break. In an interview on CTV News, science and technology expert Dan Riskin addressed the potential repercussions of a space bathroom of flatulence catastrophe, particularly in the light that our Artemis, its lunar loo, temporarily stopped working April 3rd. The crew called into mission control and was forced to remove the urine hose from the toilet's cradle in order to reactivate it, which fortunately did the trick. God, sounds like a Southwestern flight, a Southwest Airlines flight. Astronaut Christina Koch celebrated the feat, laughing about being a space plumber. I don't doubt maybe they're in lower orbit. I don't know where they think they are. I don't know. I don't even doubt it. Everyone on mission control believes this shit. They're probably watching screens. They all think it's real. I don't know how big this hoax goes, but I just. Anyway, she says, I'm proud to call myself the space plumber, she joked. I like to say that it is probably the most important piece of equipment on board. Riskin explained the space bathroom process to CTV News. Solid organic waste is stored and returned to Earth, while liquid waste is released into space. Hey, you're polluting space. Although Artemis 2's lunar loo is now up and running, he cautioned that the issue of farts remains, especially in a spacecraft that's approximately the size of 2 minivans. God, this thing is the size of 2 minivans. The gases that come out when you pass gas are flammable. He said it's hard to make them go away. But I thought you're in a vacuum. I thought space is a vacuum. I guess there's oxygen inside the spacecraft, but how does the propulsion work? Folks, all I know is I have a lot of questions. That's it. I just have a lot of questions regarding this. And this is why this is today's What the Fuck News. All right, folks, let's take some super chats real quick. Any super chats, Alex? Kelly Pineski, you're always there for me. Thank you so much. Super sticker, thank you. Jerry C. Big Shot Blues, definition of crazy. When you try to explain everything as fake with central casting players in the hope you wake up. I be cray. Yeah, I feel you. Trust me. How do you think I feel every day? Juan Morales. Juan Morales. I think it's being done on purpose. Trump knows exactly how influential these four are, so he's trolling the media. God bless America and the world. Great job, Sancho. I knew you'd like it. Thank you, Juan Morales. Jim Barbado, thank you so much for the super sticker.